Content warning for kidnapping, abuse, torture, sexual assault, and mass murder. Right. Well, hello everyone. My name is Lucy, and I have finally decided to take the plunge and make a video essay on the most pathetic wet cat of a character I have ever known. Seidou Takizawa from Tokyo Ghoul. In short, he is, in my opinion, the most tragic character in the series. Before we start, I want to mention that I have not watched the anime in roughly 7 years, and will be entirely ignoring its existence. There are 100 videos out there explaining why it sucks, but to summarize, it's a complete flanderization of the manga that turned it from a dark seinen with interesting horror and thriller elements to a basic shonen with a cool guy that beats other guys up and barely touches on important plot points, leaving viewers confused. If you've only seen the anime, be prepared to learn so much that was left out. I'd also like to give a big thanks to Randomistic for making their video on King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph, for giving me the courage and inspiration to make my own video essay, and to the entire Tokyo Ghoul fandom on Tumblr for keeping me motivated, giving me ideas, and making this fandom a much better place than it used to be. With all that out of the way, welcome to what plagues my mind on a daily basis, neatly ordered and put into video format for your viewing pleasure. Enjoy! Let's start from the beginning. From the testament he writes in volume 13, we know that in Takizawa's childhood, he had a neighbor named Mrs. Seidou who was killed by a ghoul. This event didn't seem to affect him too greatly, but it certainly affected his mum. He states that she became emotionally unstable, likely terrified of ghouls, and this event even appears to cause her to move, as we can see that when Seidou visits home, it's quite different to the neighborhood Seidou and the Kirishimas lived in. Now, Seidou clearly loves his mum and cares about her a great deal, so it's no surprise that this event is what caused him to become an investigator with the CCG. I also want to mention that he seems to care about his sister too, and that he seems disappointed his dad was out golfing when he came home. Aw, how sweet! He really loves his family. I'm sure this isn't a setup for a horrifically traumatizing scene later. Right? Through Akira, we get a flashback in Volume 9 showing what he was like when he became a student at the CCG Academy. He worked hard and got really good grades, but it just quite wasn't enough. Akira was first, and he was second. This is something that affected him greatly, seeing as he just stands there and stares sadly at his supposed failure for a while until Akira calls his name. He's annoyed just seeing her, but congratulates her anyways. This is a quality of his that she likes, that he acknowledges her achievements as her own, rather than a result of having investigator parents like their peers, but he never notices this. He's so caught up in his own jealousy that he fails to realize that Akira liked him. We don't know much else of before he became an investigator, so let's move on to part 2. The first time we see Takizawa in the series is when he excitedly introduces himself to Amon at the end of Volume 5. We can see here that he admires the heroism of Amon, Arima, and likely other strong investigators, going so far as to collect newspaper clippings of their work, as Hoji states. He's shown to be very optimistic and eager to help the world, saying, "So the fate of Tokyo lies in our hands. That's so exciting!" In addition to this, in Volume 6, we see that he's so eager to not only help, but also prove himself, that he becomes agitated when he learns he was not selected to be a part of the Aogiri raid. Hoji's right. The 20th Ward Office still needs to be protected, but all Takizawa hears is that he's not good enough to be in the real fights. He compares his rank to Juzo's, complaining that he's always the second choice. Something he seems to forget, though, is that he's only rank 2 because he was able to attend the academy and graduated with rank 2 along with all his other classmates. Juzo, on the other hand, was rescued from the restaurants and trained independently from the academy before being hired. The only real difference between the two is their past. They're both new hires. Later, in Volume 9, he continues to show annoyance towards Juzo, but admires Amon despite the fact that they had both been promoted. He's immediately distracted, though, when Akira comes in. He's very surprised and shows signs of annoyance to see her, despite her being friendly to him. When the meeting starts and Takizawa gives his report, Akira quickly realizes Tsukiyama's pattern and takes over, showing her intellect. In response, Takizawa becomes agitated and begins arguing with her. He states that he hates working with her, while she simply tells him that he hasn't grown, that he's still behaving childishly, which he very much is. Later on, when Hide is running around the office, Shinohara asks Hoji how Seidou is doing. He tends to outwardly show his emotions a lot, so it's no surprise that they noticed he was upset. He pouts as he eats his lunch and complains to Hide about Akira, and when Hide suggests that some guys might secretly like her, Takizawa mumbles, maybe. Oh my god, open up about your feelings. The next time we see him is in Volume 11, when he invites Amano to dinner and Amano invites Akira. Takizawa was surprised by this, but they all grab dinner anyways. Once there, they talk about work, and Seidou praises Hoji's work against the clouds in Shishilian, and points out how quickly he was promoted and that he wishes to do the same. Akira tells him that being promoted isn't the point, but he retorts that he simply wants to work on more cases for more vicious ghouls. Getting drunk, he complains about having to sit at a desk all day, being unable to prove himself, and Akira becomes drunk as well, and the two become honest with each other. Akira tells him that his childish behavior is a nuisance, while he tells her that she was always ahead of him in everything, but that he will accomplish more than anybody in their class and become a great investigator. He then gets a call from Hoji telling him to come back into the office to fix a report, which honestly could have waited till morning. Do you really want someone who's clearly drunk to come in and work on paperwork after hours? But I digress. After this, he's shown to be very gloomy and upset that he accidentally yelled at his boss. After returning to the office, he doesn't appear until 2 volumes later in Volume 13. Takizawa does have a bit of a point though. Why were Akira and Juzo getting to go on big missions while he, who is just as qualified, is forced to stay in the office? I think it's because he's too mentally stable. Juzo was a scrapper and can go hog wild on ghouls, and Akira has significant anger towards ghouls with her mommy and daddy issues, but Takizawa is just normal. He doesn't have any issues to exploit in battle, so while he has the same level of technical skill, he can't be manipulated to great lengths like the others. He's still able to be a vessel for spouting propaganda, though. Here is where we see the close relationship he has with his family, but also his fears surrounding the job. When faced with the possibility of death and needing to write a will, he mulls over it for a while, looking sad and debating what to say until he visits his mom and sister and writes what is quite possibly the worst thing his family could have read. He despairs over the overwhelming strength of the owl and writes, "Testament. I, the testator, leave the entirety of my possessions to my mother, Michie Takizawa." Additional remarks. To my mother and father. Do you remember when Miss Sato, who lived nearby, was killed and you became emotionally unstable, Mum? Seeing you like that made me want to protect you. That is when I decided to become a ghoul investigator. I still feel strongly about that as I did then. I stood to risk my life for the well-being of others. I have been selected to be a part of a large-scale eradication operation. Please do not be saddened if I do not return. I only wish that you continue with your lives. It was great to eat at home again. Please send my regards to Sena and Rocky too. Rank 2 Ghoul Investigator, Seidou Takizawa. And over top of it all, he obscures it with the words, "I don't want to die." On the next page, he's shown terrified and crying, with a creepy sort of smile on his face. This expression may be foreshadowing, as the furrowed brows and smile are things he quite often does in the future. That part's debatable, but what's clear as day is his tears. They spell out 15, which correlates to the Devil Tarot card. According to the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, the Devil represents ravage, violence, force, vehemence, extraordinary efforts, fatality, and that which is predestined, but not for this reason, evil. Reversed, it means evil fatality, pettiness, and blindness. These are all things we have either already seen or will soon see in his character, but something you might notice is that which is predestined, but not for this reason, evil. It's an interesting note, and something I will talk about later. In the next volume, during the Ontaku raid, despite his annoyances with Juzo, he shows immediate concern when he gets word that he was injured, and seeing that Akira is distracted, he tries to get her to focus, but she says she has a bad feeling after Amon's arm had just been cut off. Takizawa has been skeptical of her hunches, trusting in facts over gut feelings, but in this moment, he can't shake the feeling that she's right. Something's wrong. So he requests to search for Amon, but he doesn't even wait for a reply. He immediately turns and runs to look for him, admitting that her hunches were often right, and recites the exact law he's breaking. He notes that he was always watching from the sidelines, that he and Akira never really looked at each other head on, and he was left to watch Akira and Amon's relationship develop despite his own feelings. Now, in my opinion, Akira has two hands, but we're not here to talk about that. When he finds Amon, he begs him not to die, and as Tatara comes through, Takizawa becomes paralyzed with fear. He's shaking, so Amon stands and says that he'll hold him off, telling Takizawa to run. However, this is probably the peak of his character at this point in time, his most authentic self. He declares that he is a ghoul investigator, that he won't run, and shoots at Tatara, killing 2 of the ghouls with him. Unfortunately, Tatara recognized the quinque he's using as Fei, someone from the Chishi Lian, and snaps. He grabs Takizawa, questioning him about Hoji and Yan, and when he doesn't answer, he throws him in the air, allowing Noro a tasty little snack. In what are supposed to be his final moments, he cries as he thinks about Akira. Amon cries out for him, and that is the last we see of them as humans. Akira tries to hold it in. Hoji looks pained at the mention of his subordinate's death, and that's that. Investigator Seidou Takizawa is dead. I think he likely knew he was going to die, though. He disobeyed an order and broke the law, trusting in a random hunch out of fear for his friend's safety. Even though he was only one person, extremely easy for a random ghoul to pick off, he still went searching for him even though he had no idea where he was. In that moment, he was ready to sacrifice himself just for the chance he might be able to save Amon and protect Akira from looking for him herself. He knew that they were more important than him and took the CCG's teachings to heart, laying down his life for his superiors. I think Takizawa is a perfect example of how predatory the CCG is. He joined so that he could be a hero and desperately wanted a promotion so that he could get more praise for murdering more people, but it was framed as though he was exterminating vermin. He was 22 years old when he had to write a will and face Tokyo's most dangerous ghoul. To add on to that, he had been doing mostly mundane office work up until that point. We never saw or even heard of him engaging in battle. Even if he was working out off-screen, there's no doubt he had little to no experience in battle. He was always just going to be another number in the death toll. The CCG was a truly insidious company. It never cared about their investigators. They were all just pawns for a pointless war. And with that, we move on to part 3. The next time we encounter Takizawa is at the end of Volume 2, but when hit with such a drastic change in appearance and behavior, one of the first questions asked is, how did this happen? So, let's take a look. In Volume 9, Takizawa has a flashback to when he first woke up post-operation. Just before that, we see him in a pod labeled Owl 15, marking him as the 15th recipient of the Owl's Kakuho, and harkening back to the Devil Tarot. Remember that which is predestined but not for this reason evil? The way I see it, I think it means that he was always going to become a ghoul, that no matter where the story went, sooner or later he would suffer the same experiment as Kaneki and become the very monster he spent his life fighting, but that he wouldn't have to become a monster. He has only ever known ghouls to be bloodthirsty creatures that blend in with humanity only to feed, but we as the audience know that that's not true. He didn't have to turn out the way he did. He was destined to become a ghoul, sure, but he was never destined for evil. When he wakes up, he's confused. He's sure he should have died, and considering the circumstances, yes, he should have. But here he is in a concrete cell, breathing. When Dr. Kano opens the door and asks how he's doing, Takizawa is shocked and scared, asking who he is. Rather than answer him, Kano just tears away the blanket, showing his deformed and regenerating arm. Takizawa reacts with horror, screaming at the growing arm. Kano explains that out of 63 investigators taken from the Ontaku raid, he alone was the only success, and that he is now a ghoul. Before Takizawa is able to formulate a response in his horror, he throws up, much to Kano's enthusiasm, noting that his stomach has already begun rejecting human food. This is only the beginning, though, and it quickly becomes much, much worse. Kano states that he'll need to collect several samples, including scrapings of his stomach lining, fecal matter, and ejaculate. I don't think I need to explain how fucked up that is. I mean, how is he collecting these samples? What the fuck is Kano doing to... You know what? I don't want to know. Let's just keep going. As Kano is torturing Takizawa, he explains the process to Tatara. He's purposefully inflicting injuries to make Yoshimura's Kakaho compensate for Takizawa's human body, causing him to get stronger at the cost of shortening his life expectancy. This all serves a secondary purpose, though, and that is to break down his mind until he becomes their perfect little soldier. Where the CCG was a lot more subtle in their manipulation and propaganda, Aogiri's method of indoctrination was to just break him and build him back up the way they wanted, making him think he was abandoned by the CCG, and sending him out to fight and take revenge on them, and maybe get a tasty snack out of the deal too. Takizawa's mind was very resilient, though, and it took drastic measures to get him to snap and abandon his humanity. At one point, after being trapped for what seems like a long time by the length of his hair and how long it'd take for hunger to kick in, Takizawa succumbs to starvation and regresses into his new instincts. After feeding him, Kano explains how a ghoul's hunger works, that it causes so much distress that it can cause hallucinations. He then brings attention to the meat and asks Takizawa how it tasted, if it reminded him of home, leading him to realize he just ate his mum and dad. Let me repeat that. This bastard starved Seidou until his instincts kicked in and made him go crazy, then cut up and made his mother and father into human meatballs and served them to him and didn't tell him shit until he already ate most of them. I couldn't think of a more horrifying way to find out you're an orphan now. Now, I do want to mention a little theory me and a few mutuals cooked up a little while ago. We don't actually have any proof it was his parents. I mean, it just seems like so much work to find out who his parents are, find out where they live, kill them, clean up any traces, and then prepare their remains, especially when it could be all so easily faked with some random people off the street. Think about it. Why would he go through the trouble of making those meatballs when he could just throw their bodies into the cell with him as is, making a much more horrifying impact when he starts to recognize them as he eats and gains his consciousness back? It just doesn't make sense to me. Plus, he never outright says, "Hey, I just made you eat your parents." Seidou comes to that conclusion on his own after he simply asks if it reminded him of home. Either way, the point is, Seidou now at the very least believes he has eaten his own family. This was a major blow to his psyche. We don't know what happened immediately after, but we do see him cursing shortly after throwing up, which grabs Amon's attention in the cell next to him. The two talk for a bit, with Amon encouraging Takizawa not to give up, but it's too late to tell him that. He's already given up now that he has nothing left and begins chewing on his fingers, a habit he continues for a long time. This is the last we see of him until the auction, when he has fully lost himself. Another thing to note, though, is that this was all chance. Aogiri was only looking for Amon to experiment on. They had no intentions on taking Takizawa. He just happened to be there when Tataro was making way for Arima. He just happened to survive getting his arm chopped off, and he just happened to survive the experiments. When Edo asks if he's okay to go, he tells her to hurry up and that he's hungry, a drastic change from when he was human. As soon as he encounters a group of investigators, his immediate response is to decapitate the leader by ripping his head up off of his body and then compare it to a pineapple. He swings it around in the air, explaining that makes it taste better to the rest of the group, who looks on horrified. He then begins eating, causing one member of the squad, Saoike, to become enraged and begin shooting at him in terror, very similar to how Takizawa attacked Tatara before being kidnapped. This time, however, Saoike was immediately slaughtered via decapitation as well, before the rest of the squad was murdered while Takizawa laughed maniacally. The only two who managed to get away were Togi and Kukiyama, but not for long. Takizawa cornered them in a bathroom, the two investigators shaking and crying in fear as he ate one of their colleagues' faces. He then gave a monologue showcasing his new mental state and what he came to realize in that cell, that we're all scared of things that are different, like how he was afraid of ghouls but got over that fear by becoming one. He tells them that they're afraid of death, so if he kills them, they won't be afraid anymore, which, yeah, I mean, that's how death works, I guess. Can't exactly be afraid if you don't exist. Anyways, he asks if they understand, which causes Togi to recognize who he is, and tries desperately to get him to remember. Unfortunately, he does remember her, as the class clown who kept talking during his lecture. This makes him very angry, and yells at her to pay attention as he tears through her chest and rips her head off. Then, after spotting Heise and his squad, he attempts to attack them and shows surprise that Heise was able to defend. After getting a taste of his blood and learning who he is, Takizawa wants to defeat Heise and eat him. Heise counters by stabbing him and holding him in the air with his Kagane, but Takizawa barely reacts. He just laughs and yells that he's used to it, which is really, really sad. Heise orders Shirazu and Saiko to go, something Takizawa compliments him on. A model superior protecting his men. He then mentions that Hoji was a good man too, despite the fact that he failed to protect them at the Onteku raid. The two then engage in a rather intense and bloody fight. When Heise attempts to escape from Takizawa choking him, Takizawa says that he doesn't like men that way, likely something he says as a result of Kano's abuse. I can't imagine him being okay with anything sexual after that. He then tells him about his view about success and the differences between first and second. If someone is above you, you're just a loser. He then throws Heise through the roof of the building and makes a rather sad remark. He tells Heise that they should put on a play and that his lines will be, "I don't want to die," and, "Actually, I do want to die." Is this how Seidou felt in that cell? He was so scared of dying, but did the torture make him actually want to? He tosses Heise around like a ragdoll for a while, calling him weak and saying, "Hey, this is who I was being compared to?" Showing off his superiority issues on full display there. Hide turns on the PA system while they fight, catching the attention of both Hinami and Akira. While Akira is more shocked and angered hearing Takizawa's voice for the first time in years after she thought he died, Hinami is more concerned with Heise and manages to reach them first. On her way there, Takizawa taunts Heise some more and says that's just how the CCG is. They don't care about you. They'll use you and throw you out like trash. Once Hinami arrives, she gives Takizawa the big fight he was hoping for, and he begins using his partial Kakusha Kagane. We don't see much of the fight, but in the aftermath, Takizawa is seen having what appears to be a violent flashback as he hits his head against the wall, saying that he didn't eat it and apologizing to his parents, presumably for eating them. After the battle is over and Takizawa and Heise are walking away from each other, Akira arrives and begins calling out for Heise, but she then recognizes Takizawa. He recognizes her as well, addressing her as Mado before covering his face in shame and running away, the blood on his hand spelling out jealousy. We don't see him again for a while, only a small fight with investigator Hachikawa on Rishima in Volume 6, but what surrounds this appearance is more interesting in my opinion. In the Special Investigators meeting, everyone is briefed on a number of ghouls that will be there, including Takizawa, but nobody uses his name. They refer to him as Owl, saying that he's a mysterious ghoul that just showed up during the auction, and that he might be a part of Kano's experiments. Hoji appears to be the only person who recognizes him, but later in the fight, Hachikawa calls him a crazy ex-investigator, and that Hoji would cry tears of joy, leading me to think that the CCG does know who he is, but just doesn't care, seeing that as far as we know, Takizawa and Hachikawa never interacted before this. When Hoji arrives at Rishima, he leads the squad up to Tatara and begins the fight assuming he will not survive, establishing that he's already decided he will die today, setting up for what really happens later. When Takizawa interrupts the fight, everyone is surprised and waits as he kills Tatara for them, saving Hoji's life. He turns to the squad, wanting to return to the CCG and be a hero, but it's far too late. He has already brutally killed far too many investigators and has not shown a shred of sanity or mercy. Betraying Tatara out of nowhere just isn't enough to convince him that he'd be safe to bring back. Besides, they don't even know the purpose behind his actions here. Of course, we know that he was being genuine, but Hoshi and Akira don't know that. For all they know, it was a ploy to get someone to destroy the CCG from the inside out. Think about it. If Ogiri knew that Tatara was going to be killed here anyways, why not take advantage of the situation? This isn't even mentioning the fact that, as this was happening, Kaneki was fighting Arima, so even if they welcomed him back, things still wouldn't have ended well. Takizawa clearly wasn't in a clear state of mind here. No matter the circumstances, I don't think they ever would have welcomed him back, but it's very likely that this moment, this dream, was something Takizawa had been hoping for a long time. It was likely the only thought keeping him going. Build Ogiri's trust, get stronger, stab them in the back, and return to the CCG as a hero. Hoshi was really stuck between a rock and a hard place here, I feel. He didn't want to kill his former subordinate, but he couldn't just let him go either. So, with tears in his eyes, he gives the order not to kill Takizawa, but to kill the dangerous Rate SS Owl. After the battle, Akira says that Hoshi was showing mercy, but is being put down like a sick dog truly mercy? Takizawa doesn't seem to think so. He continues choking Akira until Amon finally intervenes, with Takizawa implying that he was watching the whole time, but didn't intervene until Akira's life was in danger. Takizawa attacks, assuming that Amon wants to kill him too, but Amon tells him that he's here to save him and still considers him a friend. Takizawa immediately rejects this though, considering it condescending and calls him weak. Amon latches onto something he says a moment earlier though, that this is how a ghoul does it, and questions that statement, asking if that's what he's telling himself. Amon knows that in his art, he's not a ghoul, but a ghoul investigator. Takizawa doesn't want to face that though, sooner believing that he's just a ghoul because that's what's easiest. Change is hard, something Takizawa doesn't really want to do. He'd rather ignore the painful reminder of who he once was. Amon continues to push, telling him to atone for his sins, but Takizawa jumps to the conclusion that he's expected to atone with death, something Amon denies and tries to offer another way, but Takizawa rejects that too before even hearing him out, saying he doesn't know how else to atone. After knocking Amon away, he begins to process his words, saying he wants me to repent and live, and brings the attention back over to Akira, who, in Takizawa's words, wanted him to die quietly. This is a misunderstanding though. Hoshi is the one that wanted him to die. Akira simply explained his reasoning and had no choice but to follow her superior's commands. This is when Mitsuki shows up, taking over the fight as both Amon and Akira lay injured. After a short fight, Mitsuki manages to pin Takizawa to the ground with his Kagane and tells Akira that he's going to kill him, but she cannot stand for that to happen. She rushes in front of Takizawa, shielding him from Mitsuki's killing blow and taking it herself. Takizawa questions her, and as Mitsuki continues to attack, he begs her to stop. Akira doesn't though. She continues to protect Takizawa no matter what, and gives a heartbreaking speech to him. She tells him that she could never face anyone in the CCG that she cared about again, that she failed as an investigator, let her emotions get the better of her, and protected a ghoul, throwing away her entire career for this one person she still cares about despite everything that has happened. She tells him that she has thought about the Ontegu raid over and over again, wondering if she had just stopped him. She feels partially responsible for how he turned out, because if she had only done her job as squad leader and stopped him from separating from the group, he might not have been kidnapped and made the way he is today. It's likely this is the moment he snaps out of it and regains his sanity. Amon then gets back up and attacks Mitsuki, leading to a small fight before the rest of the Quink squad arrives, providing backup. Amon tells Takizawa to take Akira and run, which he initially refuses to do, since Amon is weaker than him and he's a murderous traitor. But Amon gives him his cross necklace, a sign of trust that he will do the right thing, and says that he believes in him. Amon says that he will keep fighting no matter what, and tells him, "You have to get away this time, Seidou." protecting him from being kidnapped again and sacrificing himself. Takizawa tries to put up a facade again, saying that he only cares about himself, but Amon sees right through this. He even grabs Tomoe, Tatara's right-hand girl, who he very well could have just left. He then meets up with Tsukiyama in the white suits and returns to the mainland with them. Something I sort of noticed is the way Tatara and Hoji's rivalry extended to Takizawa. First, Hoji taught him to hate ghouls and to fight them, but then Tatara took him and taught him the same about investigators and kept him close by, almost as if he's saying, I have one of your men now, and now he's my weapon. This back and forth tug, like two kids who want to play with the same doll, is likely something that contributed to his betrayal, killing the both of them instead of lying back and letting himself be torn in two. After returning to the mainland and fighting refuge with Kaneki's group, Takizawa spends all of his time with Akira, sleeping in her room and protecting her from harm as Banjo tries his best to care for her. It's not working well, though. She isn't waking up and she's not doing too good. Takizawa is extremely concerned, yelling at Banjo to do something. When Nico shows up, he is immediately defensive, not letting him take a step closer to Akira. But when he says that she's going to die, he's terrified and starts to listen to him, mentioning that she needs a doctor. He considers Nico's words for a moment, but says that they simply can't take her to the hospital. She broke a very serious law. Things wouldn't end well. Nico clarifies, however, not all doctors work in a hospital. Kano is one example, but that idea is quickly shut down. Even if he did help, it would be incredibly dangerous. The other option, though, Taiwa Act, is possible and is who the group contacts for Akira's care. In order to treat her, however, they need RC suppressants. Suppressants are said to have a specific awful smell, something both Kaneki and Seidou have smelt many times in their torture. I'm sure Takizawa knew from the beginning that smelling the suppressants again would be a triggering experience, but he still went anyways because Akira needed it. It wasn't even a sort of I'll go if I have to thing. He demanded to go. At the lab, he already took care of security and is able to quickly sniff out where they are. After obtaining it, a worker releases Amon, who they had apparently been experimenting on, making him attack the group. Kaneki tries to fight him, but he has more important things to care for, so Takizawa and Corona take over for him. They fall back to their teachings from the academy, putting their lives on the line for their superior, and Takizawa tells Kaneki to get the suppressants to Akira, promising him that he'll bring Amon back. This is a bit of a different fight than he's used to. He's always fought to kill, but now he needs to fight to subdue. He releases his Kakuja, now fully formed and able to control it while sane, and monologues in his head as he fights. He says that he knows what Amon has been through, but where Amon continues to follow the core message of the CCG and be someone fighting for peace despite no longer holding the title of investigator, Takizawa rejects that. He has fully abandoned being an investigator and thinks of himself as only a ghoul now, embracing his nickname of Owl. He says that Amon always shone so bright that it was blinding, and that his righteousness torments him. Things that he once admired as an investigator, but now cannot stand as a ghoul because he simply cannot ever be on the same level again. Once you sin, you can never go back, he thinks. But that's just not true. All sins can be forgiven if you seek forgiveness, if I remember correctly. Even still, if it's not referring to seeking forgiveness from a god, then he'd be seeking forgiveness from himself, right? If Amon went through essentially the same things, albeit to a lesser extent, and was able to forgive himself and move forward, what's stopping Takizawa from doing the same? He could very well forgive himself, but maybe that's just not who he would accept it from. All the way back in Volume 3, in his breakdown, he apologizes to his mom and dad. If his parents are the only ones he believes can forgive him, then he's right. There's no one around to forgive him anymore, except for maybe his sister. Speaking of which, where the hell has she been? What happened to her? Was she also fed to Seidou? If so, why has he never apologized to or remembered her? What's up with that? I guess we don't really have a choice but to ignore her for the rest of the series, since she's literally never mentioned after Volume 13. Anyways, he then says that Seidou Takizawa died in that cell. He's right, because who he was before and who he is now are almost entirely different people, aside from the fact that they share a name and mostly the same body. He says he can't be righteous and fight for the greater good like Kaneki or Amon now, no matter how he wishes he could, but he can still fight. Instead of being reckless, he chooses to be desperate and chooses to fight for Akira. The journey to get here, the fight and everything was all for Akira, as he wishes for her to be happy since he's bringing Amon back. When your future's gone to shit, all you have left is to live for someone else, is his new philosophy. With no more future for him in his eyes, he chooses to live for the two people closest to him, Amon and Akira. However, after Akira wakes up and Amon meets with her again, Takizawa leaves. He talks with Kaneki for a moment and tries to give him Amon's chain to give back to him, but Kaneki refuses, knowing that if he doesn't have anything to hold him down, he'll go off and die. Even after everything he did for them, he doesn't want to see them again, or more rather, he believes they don't want to see him. It's not a totally out there train of thought. He did try to kill them, but he still saved them in the end. It's likely they did want to see him, especially Akira, since he went through all that trouble to get her to safety, get the RC suppressants for her, and never left her side, and she protected him from being killed. But he assumed they want nothing more to do with him anymore. We don't see him again until Volume 16, when he goes to return Amon's necklace during the fight with Donato along with Tomoe. Something interesting to note here is the color of his speech bubble. Up until now, Takizawa has had a black speech bubble with white, rough-looking text, as opposed to everyone else's white bubble with black comic-style text. This isn't unique to Takizawa. A few characters' bubbles change to black when their voice is distorted, but Takizawa has not had a single white bubble since Kano's torture. Now finally having one is likely a sign of recovery, becoming somewhat, quote, normal again, though his voice is still rough. He explains to Tomoe why Amon is fighting the way he is, that he can't bring himself to kill the man who raised him because he would feel empty, and she's the same way. The way he behaves here and talks to Tomoe is a little strange considering how closely she worked with Tatara though, you know? Maybe he's not as violent as he used to be now. Maybe he just has a soft spot for women. I don't know. Either way, he finds that Amon's situation overlaps with Hoji's. They're both fighting a battle they have to, but neither want to kill their opponent. Unfortunately for Hoji, Takizawa didn't realize he didn't actually want to kill him until it was too late. But now he has a chance to motivate Amon. He tosses him the necklace and asks why he still wears it, and at the end of the day, the answer is because he still loves Donato like a father. Soon comes the end of the story though, and in the 6-year time skip, all we're told is that he disappeared and probably started fighting dangerous ghouls on his own. No friends, no family, not a soul by his side as he looks sadly at 2 bodies. Even Kaneki, the main character in a manga all about tragedy, got a happy ending. But Takizawa, who went through 10 times worse the shit he did, didn't get anything for his suffering. Is this really the happiest ending he could have gotten? Again, where's his sister? And his dog? Couldn't they have met again? What about Amon and Akira, who, by the way, didn't get anything said about them in the end? Couldn't he have joined their journey? Even if he were to stay alone, why couldn't he have built his life back up and got a job and a tiny apartment at the very least? Continuing to kill without any other purpose in the world. That's the happy ending he gets?